Hi, I'm Glenn Greenwald with The Intercept, and my guest today is Kerri Evelyn Harris, who is the Democratic candidate challenging Senator Tom Carper in the Democratic primary in Delaware. Senator Carper is a three-term senator seeking a fourth term. The election will be held this week, Thursday, September 6th. Kerri, thank you so much for taking the time out of what I know is a very busy campaign trail to talk to me today.
Thank you for having me. It really does mean a lot, and especially when we're running off no corporate funds, the press is really a savior for us.
Well, that's great, and that's actually a good segue into my first question, which is that Senator Carper has obviously been a politician in Delaware for decades now. He was a governor and a House member, 3 terms in the Senate. It's notoriously difficult to run against an incumbent senator. It's hard enough to run against an incumbent House member, but especially an incumbent senator, given all the obstacles they have, given all the corporate money that he in particular has in his war chest. Why did you decide that it was worthwhile and necessary for you to run against him? And by that, I don't just mean what policies do you support, but why did you believe it would be a good thing for Senator Carper in particular to be replaced in the Senate?
Right, so yeah, we were told from the beginning this would be an uphill battle. I make the joke that I'm a whole bunch of otherness, so there hasn't been a battle that I've gone into that I've lost. So I'm not concerned, I'm not afraid of a fight. Life's been a fight, and the thing is people are being stepped on. And after Trump won, I realized that there was more of an issue than Republican versus Democrat. We had to make sure that we had the right Democrats in office, and so I started to review voting records, even more in depth than I had before. And I realized that Senator Carper wasn't working hard enough for the people of Delaware, and we needed a change. And I realized that I was a hypocrite if I'm constantly going around saying words without action are mute, and I felt a change needed to come. I had to step up, and now I'm here. I'm ready to fight for the people of Delaware and make sure that they are the center of all policy that we pass in the United States Senate.
So when you say you looked at Senator Carper's voting record and concluded he wasn't doing enough for the people of Delaware and that you wanted to do things differently and better, could you give a couple of examples of the kinds of votes he cast or the kinds of policies he defended and pursued in the course of his career that made you conclude that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So throughout his career, there have been a number of things that have not been on the side of Delawareans. His last 22 bills while in the House, the U.S. House, he actually voted or put forward bills that would either strengthen pharmaceutical companies or strengthen banks. It just shows, even from that point, how entrenched he was with pharmaceutical companies and banks. Then as governor, he did things such as expand our prison system, the largest prison expansion in the history of Delaware that still affects communities of color in such a way that families are falling apart still. Homes are broken, jobs have been lost, our economy has suffered. And we currently have such an overcrowding due to some of the laws that he passed that we have 4 men to a 2-man cell. It's a major issue here. And then as senator, again, he has a kind smile, a warm handshake, always has a witty comment, but he forgets our stories when it comes time to pass legislation, such as he approved the Keystone Pipeline, something that Delawareans are vastly against. We're the lowest lying state in the union. Climate change affects us. And we realize that every decision when it comes to environmental justice affects our state directly. He is adamantly opposed to drilling off the coast of Delaware, but is okay in Virginia, the Gulf of Mexico, in Alaska, all of these things he's approved. And without realizing how it affects the state of Delaware. And people are upset. I've literally heard people in their concerns and saying they felt deceived because he made sure he touted the few things that have that he can be proud of, but all of the other things that went behind our backs and hurt us, such as not bringing in prescription drugs from Canada that we know are tested to the same standard. And when we have a growing senior community, when we have more and more people living in poverty, the price of prescription drugs literally means at this point paying your rent, paying your mortgage, paying your car note, putting food on the table, or getting the prescriptions you need to save your life. He does not understand the urgency of change right now that all Delawareans are feeling. He doesn't realize that we need to raise our minimum wage. He says he cares, but now he just says, let's index it.
One of the common themes that one hears when talking to Delaware political activists, Delaware journalists, and the like, is Delaware, obviously, as most people know, has very permissive pro-corporate laws. When I was a lawyer in New York, it was automatically assumed that if you wanted to incorporate a new company, you would do it in Delaware because there were the most advantages there. And so even liberal politicians in Delaware like Joe Biden or Democrats like Chris Coons are notoriously subservient to the banking and the credit card interests of the state. And some people say, well, that's actually a good thing for Delaware because Delaware relies on those industries, relies on those corporations. What do you think about that? Is that valid, or does that come at the expense of the ordinary person who lives in Delaware?
You said it there. It does come at the expense of the ordinary person in Delaware. You see, we're the Cayman Islands of the United States. Allowing more restrictions isn't going to suddenly make all of these corporations run away. We're still going to be their very best option. We need legislators who realize that we have to make sure the people of Delaware win with every decision, every contract signed. We've seen time and time again that because we are so dependent on one industry, that they hold us like it's in a vice grip. And we need to be able to have more control. We need to make sure that the people of Delaware are given wages that are fair. We need to make sure that they aren't losing out. As soon as the contract comes to an end, we're seeing industries leaving, and we're still left behind. We're still struggling just to survive. We don't have enough jobs. Our students go to school here and they leave because there aren't opportunities. So no, I can't agree with the what has been the status quo of making sure banks and other corporations are doing well while the people of Delaware are suffering.
So one of the things that I think has made this race so interesting and has attracted a lot more attention than a Delaware primary race typically would receive, especially against an entrenched incumbent, is your background and who you are. I think it's fair to say that you're not a conventional Senate candidate who runs a credible and serious campaign as you've done. And yet at the same time, it seems to me like your background and your life and who you are and what you've experienced has played a formative role in your politics. So could you talk a little bit about just what the trajectory of your life has been and who you are and how that's shaped the political perspectives that you have?
Absolutely. And you know, my experience is vast. I've spent my time in the military, and that's how I got here to Delaware. I was a loadmaster on C-5s, and I had the honor of transporting troops and equipment. I had the honor of bringing back fallen soldiers and making sure that they returned with dignity to the United States. But every time, as more and more information came out, we learned that our legislators sent us to war without doing their due diligence to make sure we were going for the right reasons. We lost lives in theater. We lost lives due to suicide. We've lost lives due to PTSD, wounds that we don't see but are real and affect families, all because our legislators didn't try hard enough. We're hearing time and time again about these huge military spending budgets that are supposed to support the troops, but when you look deeper, it only expands corporate pockets. And then when I got out of the military, I was medically retired, and I realized just how hard it was to find a job, to be settled. I had a fried chicken at a local gas station, cut lawns, and clean basements just to make ends meet, and I still didn't make it happen because our communities are so impacted. I have been blessed to have a family that is always there, but many people don't have that. I was so close to being one of the numerous military members, veterans, living in the streets because I couldn't make ends meet. And then I had the opportunity to be employed full-time as an auto body mechanic and doing blue-collar work, knowing what it's like to use your body to make something happen, the effects, how it cuts down on the longevity of your career because it beats you up. And knowing that month after month, we got luncheons telling us, hey, you made record profits for the company, but most of us were having problems paying our bills. This is what it's like.
I think it's so interesting because in a lot of ways, there's an obvious parallel with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who many people dismissed or mocked in some way as saying, last year she was a bartender, and how suddenly now, because she expected to be a member of Congress making sophisticated policy. If you look at what the founders envisioned, it was very much a kind of citizen legislature, not a professional politician class. So I know there's been articles, for example, about struggles that you've had economically, even to buy a wardrobe that enables you to run a campaign where you're wearing the right clothes and different clothes every day. Whereas Tom Carper has spent the last 35 years ensconced in the halls of power. Talk about what you think the importance of that is in terms of being able to legislate while at the same time having not an abstract understanding of the struggles of people, but a very visceral and personal understanding of it.
Absolutely. I find it insulting, not just personally, but for the community that I'm looking to serve, to say that we aren't qualified when we figure out a way to stretch every dollar to make it through every single month, and they say with millions of dollars that they can't figure out a way to save our lives. It's insulting to say that the people, the backbone of this state, this nation, don't have the ability to write legislation when we are the ones that understand what it takes to move forward. You see, we have people in Congress who have gone through the same exact pipeline. They have the same exact experience. And so when it comes time to write legislation, they don't see how it is possible to leave the rest of us in the margins. We need to have diversity and experience. We need to have the teacher leaving the classroom and stepping into the halls of Congress. We need to have the auto body mechanic, the lifetime retail worker. We need to have the community organizer. We need all of these voices present so that when we write legislation, it is fully encompassing and we pull people from the margins and into the core. And every time they say someone like myself or Ocasio isn't qualified, they're saying that the people of Delaware, the people of the United States, the people of New York, every state in this union are not qualified to say what it is we need to strengthen our families and our communities. And we know better now, and our voices are going to be heard.
So along those lines, you haven't really made your identity, in the sense of identity politics, a central part of your campaign. Nonetheless, it's obviously notable that if you were to win, it would be a series of incredible historic firsts all at once. You would be the first African-American senator elected from Delaware. You'd be the first woman senator from Delaware, and also the first LGBT senator from Delaware.
And the first working person from Delaware.
Yeah, the first working class person from Delaware, who's actually working class right now. And you're running against somebody who, as we just talked about, has spent 35 years in Congress as governor and then as senator, and who has scandals in his past, such as slapping his wife and then lying about it and then finally admitting it. And yet at the same time, you have women's groups and LGBT groups, the groups that claim to represent people like you, not staying neutral in the race, certainly not endorsing you, but actually united behind your opponent, against you. Just like the same groups did against Ocasio-Cortez in favor of Joe Crowley, just like they're doing now in favor of Andrew Cuomo against Cynthia Nixon, who would be the first LGBT and woman governor of New York. How does that make you feel, and what do you think that says about the current state of Democratic Party politics?
It's very disappointing. These groups largely are following suit in what we thought was necessary to move legislation. Again, they've pulled away from the people. The voice of the people needs to be central to everything. Unfortunately, many of these groups feel that they're afraid to take the chance on the person they know is right. I've had conversations with individuals from many of these groups, and they say to me, remember, we're made up of individuals, but we can't take the chance. If you lose, we might lose the support for the issues that move us. They know that if someone like myself or Ocasio wins, we're going to fight for them anyway. But the problem is the perception that follows their endorsements makes it so that the people are afraid of voting for themselves also. So we need these organizations that have a voice to find that strength, to dig deep and say, you know what, we're going to encourage change because it's the right thing. We're going to encourage the voices of the voiceless. And until they do that, until they're willing to step up and show their own leadership, they're going to perpetuate this cycle that is going forward. Luckily, the people are speaking a little bit louder and starting to find their own power. And hopefully, in the same way that they're going to affect the Democratic Party and move them closer to the people, will move these organizations closer to the people as well.
So just to conclude, I want to ask you about a couple of specific policy questions, in particular questions that don't get a lot of attention in Democratic Party primary races regarding foreign policy, which I think is a particularly interesting area to explore with you because of your status as a veteran, as an Air Force veteran who served in Iraq. And I want to begin by asking you just in general about the now 17-year-old bipartisan war on terror, which has involved the bombing of 8 different predominantly Muslim countries with no end in sight, as well as military operations in a variety of other countries. 17 years later, what's your assessment of this bipartisan strategy? Do you think this constant, endless bombing is in fact reducing the threat of terror as the justification invoked for it suggests, or do you think it's making that threat worse?
I absolutely think it's making the threat worse. We go into countries with the guise that we're there to help the people, to defend ourselves, and then we leave countries in complete disrepair. Families are broken, people die. I remember hearing story after story about interpreters who took their lives in their own hands to help Americans, and we left them behind. It's literally crushing entire communities. And then when the American public is done, when we've thrown up our hands and said enough is enough, we leave, and we leave these people behind. And you know who else is left behind? It's the groups that are pushing hate and terrorist ideas. And we wonder where it comes from. We would not open up that road if we realized there are human beings on the other side of all of this destruction. There are human beings that want a better life. We should be building up countries. We should be building alliances. We should be understanding that these countries have people that want change. And if we help them grow, they will be the ones that put in the right governments. They will be the ones that make sure that we move forward as a world force. And they will look to us, again, as a place of hope and opportunity. But so long as we think we can wage our might and determine for other countries what their government looks like, we're continuously going to have these issues of terror. And that is something that I do not promote. And the majority of my service members understand we have to change how we approach international politics.
So just a specific question about that. There is a very rapidly evolving debate within Democratic Party politics and even more broadly within US and European discourse about the question of the Israeli-Palestine conflict. And one of the things that I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did in her campaign that first attracted so much attention was when Israeli soldiers were shooting at unarmed Gazan protesters. She went and denounced it as a massacre, and in very stark terms said it's time for the Democratic Party to stop ignoring and empowering this, something that no Democrat would be willing to do, let alone one running in New York. What is your view on the ongoing U.S. support for the Israeli occupation of Palestine going on decades now? And what is your view just generally on that conflict?
I believe that we really need to step away from arming and facilitating the Israeli military. They are our allies, and I want them to remain our allies. But that does not mean at the expense of Palestinians. Human rights violations are human rights violations, regardless of who commits them. And we have to stand strong with what we believe is our ethos as Americans, right? We have to be there and for those who are the least amongst us. There is a long history there. And there was a time when Israel was attacked on a regular basis. And I know that there is a divide between generations of people from Jewish descent. The older generation is still on the defensive, and it's understandable. The younger generation says we need to move forward and create peace. Because I hear both of these dynamics, because I hear Palestinians feeling that they are being forgotten, I know that our place as Americans is not to tell them how to move forward, but to be facilitators in the conversation for peace. But so long as we're arming one regime, as so long as we're making excuses for every action that takes another human's life, we have blood on our hands. And it's not the politically, it's not the thing to say, but it's the thing that has to be said. We can do better. And we know that we have the ability to call Israel to the table and say, let's work with your Palestinian brothers and sisters and figure out a way to create peace that you guys choose. And we will be there to be the moderators, but we have no say-so in what happens because you know your region better than we ever could. But I also disagree with moving our embassy. We just perpetuated a deeper divide. And so we really need to step back and decide to do better and facilitate peace.
So for my last question, and it's often taken as a broad question, but I think it can be really answered kind of as a specific question about the values of our politics, things we even talked about with Senator Carper's record. You're part of this growing and increasingly successful, what's called an insurgency within the Democratic Party to move away from this model of being funded by and therefore subservient to large corporations. And begin to focus more on the ordinary citizen, the ordinary worker. And as part of that, you're part of a movement that advocates things like Medicaid for all, free colleges, loan forgiveness and the like, things that Senator Sanders ran on and others as well. And the question that typically gets asked is, okay, well, those sound like great gifts to offer people so that they'll vote for you. You're promising them things. But how are you going to pay for it in a nation saddled by debt and deficits? What's your answer to that?
Well, they all have a little bit of a different answer, but the resounding answer, the one that the overarching theme is reprioritizing. We need to reprioritize the people of the United States. Never in history have we seen when corporations do well, the people do well. History has shown us that when people do well, corporations will grow, and never the reverse. And so the moment we go back to the people is when we will move forward as a nation. And so when we talk about healthcare, it is one of the biggest costs that burden families in the United States. Delawareans, on average, 85 to 90% of us have health insurance. We can't afford to use it. Deductibles are too high. Premiums are too high. Co-pays are too high. So we have it in name only, but when it comes to use, we have to opt out. Access is a relative term, and we have to have legislators who understand the urgency of saving people's lives. We've seen studies that show that over time it will cost us less. And there's this big number of $2 trillion. But I even say to you that even if it costs us a little bit more, is your life and the life of your family members not worth it? We find ways to send people like myself to war. We spend trillions and trillions of dollars on a war that we just pulled out of and said, oops, we made a mistake. But they're not willing to roll up their sleeves and find the answers that save lives. When it comes to forgiving student loan debt, economist after economist says we have $1.4 trillion in debt, student loan debt, 90% of which the government owns. We're not making money as a government. If you forgive it, we will inject, those people who have student loans will inject into our economy money because they're buying homes and cars and products that actually make our GDP grow. And the estimates vary between $86 billion and $100 billion a year. When have the banks that we bailed out given that much back to our economy? We have to make sure our people are moving forward. When it comes to universal pre-K, again, this is something our families need. A quarter of our income as working families with young children goes towards childcare. When we don't have pensions anymore, we need to pay into our retirements. We have to pay down debt. We have to purchase products. It would be better for us to make sure that our children are cared for, are getting the proper education, because we see education gaps as young as 2 years old. Strengthen our economy by making sure our children are properly educated and ready to go into the workforce, and show that America is one of the strongest producers in the world once again. And with the estimates we've come up with, we're going to have to slowly transition to the point where I would like to see early childhood education starting at 6 weeks old. But 3 and 4-year-olds, for every 3 and 4-year-olds in the United States of America, it will cost $90 billion. It just happens to be the exact middle of what would be put into our GDP if we forgive student loan debt. So again, we pay for it by reprioritizing, looking at how we can fix things and who it is that we want to bail out. I say bail out the people so that we can grow our economy, not constantly give to corporations who only buy up more and more stocks and bonds, pay CEOs large amounts of money while the rest of us suffer. We can do better if we choose better.
All right, well, Kerri, I'm somebody who strongly believes that primaries are extremely healthy for any political party, especially the longer someone is in office, the more beneficial it is for them to be forced to defend what it is that they've done for the people they claim to be representing. So whatever the outcome on Thursday is, I want to really congratulate you. I know that you have run a very diligent and hardworking campaign that has brought a debate to Delaware that it hasn't seen for some time, and that I think has been very healthy, not just for Delaware, but for the Democratic Party in the U.S. generally. So congratulations on that, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you so much. And again, I have to give all the kudos to my team, because I'm only here because of their strength and hard work.